Good morning. If you're wondering what it's like to be an adult, I'm filming this at 8:30 a.m. These gremlins woke me up and now I can't go back to sleep. It's been a hot minute since I've done a wrap-up, and I feel like we don't even brand them as wrap-ups anymore. It's just, here's what I read over the past month, which are still so much fun to watch. So I don't know why I don't film these more often. Anyway, I read 11 books in October. I wrote down some stats in my journal, so let me read those to you. I had 1 DNF, 4 romance books, 2 YA books, 2 literary fiction books, 1 graphic novel, and 1 non-fiction book. So that's the array of genres that I consumed. But we'll talk individually about each of these books, beginning now. So the first book I read the month of October was The Future Home of the Living God by Louise Erdrich. This is a literary fiction novel about this futuristic America where, for some strange unknown reason, instead of evolution going forward and humans adapting better and better to life on Earth, evolution starts going backwards, and the new fetuses that are born aren't entirely human. And in reaction to this, obviously there's lots of panic, but the government decides to put massive restrictions on pregnancy and pregnant women. They have to be institutionalized by each state. And so this book follows a woman who is of a Native American descent. She discovers she's pregnant, and so she's trying to hide out from the government to make sure that she and her baby are okay, because she has hope that she's carrying a baby that isn't affected by this evolution going backwards. So this is a story about her finding her family and hiding out and coping with this world. I gave this book 3 stars. I just didn't really love how this was slow at the beginning and end, and then the middle was the only interesting part, even though during the middle we met some characters that I loved. I liked the main character's resilience and the way that she reacted to the world. For a futuristic book, I think that this is actually really realistic, which was terrifying. But the reason I gave it 3 stars is because it just dragged a little bit. I didn't love the main character. I felt like we were at a little bit arm's length with her. Besides that, it just really didn't grab me the way that I had thought it would, because it's about women in pregnancy and women's bodies being controlled by the government, so that obviously is something that is scary. I never really felt intimidated by this, and I don't know if it's because it was a little bit too unrealistic for me, or the writing style just didn't make me connect with it, but I just wish this would have grabbed me more. So yeah, 3 stars. It was still an interesting concept. I would read more about this author, and I'm not upset that I read it. It was just kind of middle of the road for me. The next book I read was the nonfiction book. It's called Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. So this is a nonfiction book that follows how do you maintain a good mental state and how do you navigate a world that is increasingly technological. And specifically, he focuses on how social media and the news and technology and media in general try and encourage you to be nervous, because capitalism wants you to be afraid. They want to tear you down in order to sell you something. And this is honestly just a book about reminders and different tactics you can use to make sure that you're keeping in a healthy headspace and you're not being entirely manipulated by these sources that are telling you false things just because they're reporting a message or they're trying to sell you something. Matt Haig is also the author of this little handy book, Reasons to Stay Alive. Both of these are nonfiction books on anxiety and depression. That one more so depression, this one more so anxiety. Matt Haig does have depression and anxiety, so he speaks from a place of authenticity and experience. And the thing that I love about these books is that the chapters are super short, like literally 1 or 2 pages each. And so I love that this book incorporates short chapters and lists, and it alternates between anecdotes and him talking about mental health and making a really valid point that I'd never thought about before. With this book, rather than tabbing it up, I actually went through and underlined a bunch of things that I liked, so it was really nice to read this with a pen in my hand. And if anything, the way I would describe this book is just a pat on the back. From feeling validated that you're not the only one experiencing these feelings, to getting actual advice and help on the page, and reassurance that it gets better, and debunking all these lies at the media. I just like where Matt Haig is coming from with this, and it's a good resource, I would call this, if you ever feel like you log on to Twitter and it just makes you anxious, or you can't watch the news because it makes you feel miserable. I'm sure that this will be a comfort to you, so I would recommend it to people like that. And I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read, I don't have anymore because I lent it out to a friend, but I read an arc of Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This book follows a young black woman who has had fibromyalgia for several years. Because of that, she's really limited her life experiences to staying at home and making sure a flare-up doesn't occur. But then she almost loses her life in this freak accident and was so close to death that she realizes, I need to get a life. And so she makes a list for herself to accomplish so that she can feel like she's doing something and she's not just being afraid at home all the time. So she moves out, and at this new apartment building she lives at, there is this handyman who she has beef with. But in a turn of events, she asks him to help her accomplish some of the items on her list, like going camping, riding a motorcycle, and all these fun adventure-y things, and that person and her learn to get along and they learn more about each other. This book was just pure fluff and cuteness. It's a book about these two people going camping and having these adventures and just checking off items on a bucket list. It's literally like a YA contemporary, except elevated to be in a romance context, but at the same time it's also this really deep story about chronic pain and management of that, and having people understand that and navigating romance when you're dealing with that. So there was this really dualistic side of it where, like, yes, it's fun and it's fluffy and it's easy, but then there's also that deepness to it that's almost educational in the way that you learn more about the character's fears and her experiences. The romance was so cute. It was very fluffy and very sweet. I love the way Talia Hibbert writes romance because it's very consensual, very easygoing, no shady business at all. So I gave this book 4 stars. What brought it down for me though is the fact that there were a lot of monologue moments where there would be cheesy, groan-worthy, like, I love you monologues, which if you're into that and you like the cheesiness of it, you wouldn't mind it. But I would recommend this book just because it's really wholesome, but it also goes into deeper topics. Then I read an e-arc of a book called Orpheus Girl, and this is by Bryn Rebel Henry. This is a very short YA contemporary that is Greek inspired. It's about these two girls that live in a really small conservative Texan town, and they're discovered kissing by their parents. One of the girls is sent off to a conversion therapy camp, and then the next day her girlfriend discovers that she's also being sent to that camp. So in a twisted way, it's a retelling of the Orpheus myth where Orpheus has to go to hell to retrieve his beloved. So she describes it as she's going to this conversion camp so that they can both go escape. So it's a female-female romance set at a conversion therapy camp. I gave it 2.5 stars. I want to say first and foremost that I'm sensitive talking about this because obviously I don't want to quantify, like, ugh, a book about gay girls being traumatized isn't good enough, because I just don't want it to come off like I'm roasting this book for not being hard enough on these girls, because obviously I didn't want them to suffer as much as they did. But I felt like this book took no risks, and this book was very cookie cutter, very convenient. The way I described it in my reading blog is that it almost felt like the first draft of a NaNoWriMo book where they got to 50,000 words and they were like, all right, we're good, and everything was just so glossed over. Like I said, there were a lot of plot points that were just convenient, like there was no actual structure behind the story other than this happened, then this happened, and conveniently this happened, then this happened. Although I liked the characters and their relationship and their loyalty to one another, I just really wasn't sold on this book because it was so abbreviated. The author could have gone back and added more descriptions and made it longer than 170 pages for a book that's so clearly important and traumatizing and touching. It just felt like I'd skimmed over it even though I'd read the full story. And I think a story of that scope and magnitude deserves to be talked about in the scope and magnitude that matches that conversation, and it just felt so short. So because this book never really shocked me or touched me the way that I was hoping it would, I only gave it 2.5 stars. But if you're interested in Greek mythology or you want to read a really gripping and sad female-female story that ends on a positive note, no matter how unrealistic it was and convenient they got to that point, I would recommend it a little. And because I know I'm gonna get this comment, yes, I am planning on reading The Miseducation of Cameron Post. So the next book I read was Reveal Me by Tada Mafi. This is a novella in my favorite series, Shatter Me. This is book 5.5. It comes in between the last book, Define Me, and the final book in the series that's coming out in March, Imagine Me. It takes place in Kenji's point of view, and it links together what happened at the end of one book and what's gonna happen at the beginning of the next book. And it was stupid. I really was not having a good time when I was reading that book. I'm just really over Kenji's perspective. He doesn't need to be there. He doesn't need to be a main character. Half of the book is just him arguing with Nazira, whose relationship I've stopped caring about. I think I'm being negative because I just don't like the perspective it's from and that it focuses on such dumb stuff. But I liked Juliet in the novella. I liked the ending of the novella. Some of the lines of dialogue were funny. But just overall, I can't shake the feeling that this novella didn't need to exist because it was all just stupid drama in the context of the world being at the most critical point in the story that it's ever been, and we literally ended to find me like, cool, birthday party, but like what's happening next? And this really didn't give you any vision to that. It was just kind of like, they're arguing. It was such a wasted opportunity to actually give us useful information because there's still a lot of threads and storylines unsolved and there's so many characters and questions we have. So I gave it 2.5 stars. I'm just really over the novellas. I don't recommend that one. I think you can just read the next one without reading the novella because usually in the novellas there's critical information that you have to read in order to read the next one, but this one was just dumb. The next book I read was better than Reveal Me, but only by a little bit, and that's kind of gonna give you some context of how terrible Reveal Me was. I read Pestilence by Laura Thalassa, and let me give you a synopsis, but buckle up because it's wild. It's so wild my voice cracked. So this book is an adult romance book. It's fantasy paranormal, and it's about this woman named Sarah, without an H, S-A-R-A. Sarah. She lives in a remote Canadian town and works as a firefighter, and so the book takes place where the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have decided it is time to storm Earth. Humanity is terrible, we're gonna wipe them out. So the first phase of this is Pestilence, which is plague. So Pestilence is a dude who rides around on a horse and spreads plague wherever he goes. If you're anything like me, you heard on a horse and stopped listening and you fell in love with him. This woman, Sarah, decides that she wants to stop the plague and she doesn't want her town to die, and so she stays behind while everyone evacuates and tries to kill him. Seemingly obvious to us, so not necessarily to her, he's an immortal being. He can't die, so he does it, and he recovers and then is like, not really cool of you to do that. How about I keep you as a slave and make you suffer? So the entire book is about how he is going around on his horse spreading illness and disease, and he literally drags her behind his horse in handcuffs and makes her watch and suffer and wants to get back at her for trying to kill him. And then they fall in love. And it was only a little bit better than Reveal Me. So this book isn't good. It has really glaringly obvious issues, like there's possessiveness and the writing is terrible, it's misogynist, and the main character is just silly and dumb. But here's the thing. It was damn fun to read. That book was so fun to pick back up and resume because it was just so ridiculous that I couldn't stop reading. Every single page there was something new that I just made fun of so hard. Like, this is truly one of those trashy books that you pick up just when you need something light and fun, even though it might be infuriating because it's not realistic and not good. But I just had a great time every time I picked it back up when I was sharing my reactions to it. So yeah, I gave that one 2 stars. I'm not going to continue the series because there wasn't enough smut to justify reading on, but it was still just like, if you need a quick read, it's on Scribd, it's on Kindle Unlimited, just indulge. The next book I read is a graphic novel. This one's called Monstrous by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. I need to give you a synopsis of this before I talk about my thoughts, but here's the problem. I don't know. So this is a fantasy world. It follows a main character named Micah. She is not human, and there's different breeds of characters in this. So there's like witches and non-humans and humans, and they're all like separate because political strife. So like the animal hybrids are being sold into slavery and like being sold to scientists and killed. So they're hiding out, but at the same time Micah is trying to discover the mystery of her mother and who killed her mother and why. And I'm gonna put an epilogue on that synopsis by saying, I think my biggest issue with this graphic novel is I have no idea what just happened. I think this story format would be good as a TV show or a full drawn out novel, but as was, it gave you like one panel to understand what certain concepts were, and to this day I can't tell you any characters' names other than the one that's in the synopsis. The world, the different types of characters, anything. I really didn't know what was happening, and it was such a shame because the writing and the art style of this is absolutely gorgeous. It's also quite gory, and I liked that it had that darkness to it. But yeah, I liked the strength of the main character. I liked the vibe of it. I just couldn't understand a single goddamn thing. So I gave it 3 stars. I really wish I would have enjoyed it more. And actually looking through the art, I was like, I should try to reread this just because it was so pretty. And now that I have a grasp of it, maybe if I reread it, it'll sink in. The next book I read was another adult romance book that I had on NetGalley. It was an arc of Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren. So this book is in a dual timeline with these 2 characters when they're teenagers, and these 2 characters again 14 years later when they're in their 30s. So when they're teenagers, they're both on trips to London and they meet one another, and they have this whirlwind romance that ends in betrayal and confusion, and they don't see each other again until 14 years later when the main character is an actress following in the footsteps of her father, who's a famous actor, and she goes on set to film what's going to be her most major project, and when she gets on set realizes the screenwriter of that film is this boy that she hasn't seen in 14 years, and she has no explanation for how things ended the way it did. And so this book is truly about like second chance romance, sort of enemies to lovers, figuring out what went wrong, rekindling that relationship, blah blah blah. But this book is kind of different than other Christina Lauren books because they're very much focused on quick light fun. Their last book, The Unhoneymooners, was enemies to lovers, really fun rom-com, and this one is more of a then and now piece, sort of reminiscent of Taylor Jenkins Reid, where the scope of it is so much larger. First and foremost, I continue to adore Christina Lauren's writing style. I think they have continued to evolve, and the way that they show the most minor interactions, like eye contact and hand holding and like gentle touches, that's the type of shit that gets me going. I love the way that they detail out that subtle intimacy and the way that they can draw out that tension based on such minor interactions. That's something that is so underrated, and I love that Christina Lauren does that. I really enjoyed the first half of the story that was their relationship when they were teenagers. I thought it was so sweet, but it didn't really read like insta-love romance. I think it was really justified and deep. I didn't have any general complaints about this book other than it was just not my favorite. I liked the characters, I liked the writing, but I wasn't wowed by it like I was with like Josh and Hazel, and I think it's because there's an added layer to that book that makes them relatable, whereas this book, it felt a little bit more polished. But one thing that I've noticed in their books, and that definitely this book fell victim to, is that whenever they're writing romance books, there's this entire cast of characters, like the main character's family is involved, and there's side plots, but everything feels like it's just zoned in on the 2 main characters, and you only ever see on page the moments that those 2 characters are interacting, and it just skips the other stuff around it. Which for a romance book is good because it makes it really fast paced because you're only focusing on the main meat of the story. But this book to me just lost a lot of humanizing the background characters and the rest of the story just because it sidelined everything to the main romance occurring. That was just a little bit vanilla. I loved the main character's family. I thought it was interesting that her dad is a celebrity and she's following in his footsteps, and the whole reason that there's turmoil in her life is because she's had to be in hiding because her dad is so famous. There were just so many other side plots that I thought were interesting that were really just unsolved or not drawn out to their full effectiveness because it only decided to focus on these 2 characters used to love each other and now they don't. Like, what's gonna happen next? The fact that I saw potential in it and that it just decided to skip over all of that was something that disappointed me. So with this book, I just have a lot of little criticisms, and none of them are actual like deal breakers. So I just gave it 4 stars. I still think it was enjoyable. The writing was beautiful. It was sweet. Moving along, the next book that I read is my 5-star book of the month. And this book ruined me emotionally. If you saw the reading vlog where I read this, I'm sure there's no words needed for my reaction to it. But I read The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Luis Zafón. This is a historical fiction book translated from Spanish. It's set in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in Barcelona, Spain, and it follows this character named Daniel, whose father is a keeper of a bookstore, and one day he shows Daniel this spectacular secretive bookstore that homes all these rare copies of books. And he discovers this book that he falls in love with, and he wants to read the rest of that author's works. But all of those books by that author have mysteriously disappeared, and even the copy that he has, he's being approached by a random creepy figure being asked to get rid of it or to sell it or destroy it. So there's really nefarious things going on with what happened to this author, who is that man, why are all the books disappeared, and so he goes on this mission to discover this author's past and see where his books have gone, who he is, how he died, and all this different stuff. And this book is a masterpiece. As you can see, I have put multiple tabs in here. The writing style and the characters and the development of it is just stunning. I think this book appeals to multiple audiences because it's so rich. First and foremost, I like it because it's about a book-obsessed character who's lonely and finds solace in books, and who can't relate to that? It just puts it at ground level for all of us to get on board. And then it just expands the story into whirlwind romances and traveling through the city on special missions and meeting eccentric characters who are from rags to riches, and you just grow to love them. There's intrigue and there's mystery, and as you know, I'm not a person that likes to read mysteries, but this book completely sold me and captivated me. This comes full circle. It's just so beautiful. If you don't read literary fiction, I would still highly recommend this. It's 500 pages, but it's so easy and fast to read. This had me so engaged. I literally closed the book and then wanted to immediately reread it because it's one of those books where everything changes once you realize at the end the big plot twists. It was just absolutely beautiful and haunting and so heartwarming. I literally ended this book sobbing, and this is gonna be one of those books that I'll see in a bookstore and just walk up to it and be like, I highly recommend you pick it up. I know you've probably heard of this book or you've seen it in a used bookstore. If you can get this, you have got to read it. It was beautiful. Full 5 stars. Love this. It is exactly my jam. And yes, I want to read more by this author. I know this is a series. I don't know if I'll read the series, but I absolutely loved his writing. And whoever translated this did a great job because it was just seamless and gorgeous. So the next book I read was my DNF. I read Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. This is a YA fantasy book that's also an Arthur and the Knights retelling. So basically Arthur is reborn every few generations, and Merlin awakens and has to train them, and then inevitably it fails. Merlin goes away again, and they wait for the new Arthur to be born and come into age. So this book follows a main character named Ari, who for the first time is a female Arthur. And this is set in a really extravagant sci-fi world where Earth is uninhabitable, so they're going around all these different planets. Merlin is along with them now, having never experienced life outside of Earth, and so it's just this ragtag tale about all these characters that are mirroring characters from the original myth. Ari having to step into her role as Arthur, needing to fulfill this mission that I'm not entirely clear what it is because I didn't finish the book. So I got about 100 pages into this before deciding it just wasn't my cup of tea. I loved Merlin's perspective. It's so funny. But this book was really confusing. It didn't stop and explain a lot of what was happening. And it got to the point where they'd be like, boom, 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 this is happening, this is happening. I was just like, what? Where did that come from? Also, the dialogue of this could be pretty cringy. There were a couple times where I was like, ooh. I wasn't loving this book, and it was kind of a struggle to pick up. So I've told myself I only have limited time when I'm not working. I want to read stuff that I'm gonna enjoy. So I put this on the back burner. I honestly wouldn't mind picking this back up. Maybe if I find it on audiobook, I'll continue it because I wasn't hating it. It was just difficult to read because the dialogue was getting cringy and things were just happening in such quick succession with very little backstory or explanation. Maybe I'll go back to it. Someone convince me. And one more book to talk about. My camera's about to die, so we might speed through this. But I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca, which is an adult romance. This is about a woman named Emily who works at a Renaissance fair. The person who runs the fair is Simon because she's continuing this family legacy of doing the fair, and he takes it so seriously. But Emily's new in town. He finds her very suspicious. They have a lot of tension, and so as enemies to lovers, But here's the catch. They can hate each other in real life, but when they're at the Renaissance Fair working together, they have to put on these personas of they don't hate each other and they're getting along. And so it's them having to be in character all day. It develops into a romance, and I really like that this explores the main character having dropped out of college, and so that's a really big insecurity of hers. My camera died and I can't be fucked charging it for 2 minutes of filming, so let's deal with this. The main character is also dealing with her ex-boyfriend having manipulated her and ended their relationship off on a really bad note and just been really terrible to her, so she's having to recover from her confidence falling and stuff. And so it develops into a romance between these two characters, and they have to open up about each of their insecurities. Ultimately, I wasn't entirely sold on it. I think this book focuses a lot on inner monologue and dialogue rather than description, so it was really lacking with the description of the fair. And also the character's inner monologue was so non-subtle that it would indicate something and be like, what is that? In a very obvious way, and point out like, oh, that's going to be important later in the story. So although at the beginning of this I was really enjoying it because it was funny and it was relatable and it was cute, it slowly developed into being really obvious. But other than the writing style being that way, I just thought it was okay. I didn't mind any of the characters, I just didn't love them, and I think that might be because she didn't stop and flesh them out. It was just very inner monologue driven, very explainy. The guy was fine. The main character was fine. This just was really a 3-star average book for me. I didn't really fall in love with them, but it also just wasn't terrible. I just wish this book took a bigger opportunity to delve into that fair and to delve into the descriptions of it and talking about how the heightened angst of having to pretend to like one another when they're in character and then hating each other in person. It just felt so lost on me because this is so insta-lovey. Like, she hates him at the beginning of the book because he's so snotty, but then as soon as she sees him in leather pants because he plays a pirate in the Renaissance Fair, she's like, oh wait, but I love him. Which, relatable, girl. Like, I see you. But for a fiction book, I just wanted there to be more drawn out angst, and there wasn't. It's okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. That is everything that I read. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Sorry for the iPhone quality here at the end, but thank you for attending my TED Talk. Bye.